Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. It gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome our guest, Phehello Mofokeng, an old friend, a colleague, a fellow poet from back in the Newtown days, but also someone who has a lot of experience, both writing and publishing work from the fringes of the South African literary scene. Phehello started a zine, a literary and poetry zine called Geko, all the way back in 2005, which is a weirdly long time ago. It still exists online and is still an important part of the Joburg scene. And he's also the owner and publisher of Geko Publishing, which has a pretty distinguished kind of track record and was founded around 2007. And has published a lot of the voices that the mainstream literary industry chooses not to for whatever reason. Phehello is also a writer. He's written 2 books. The first one was Sankamota, an ode in 1 album. And the second one looks like that. It came out last year, and it's called Note to Taiwa. And it's a reflective essay, a long-form essay on Moses Molelekwa and his influence in the South African creative world. So I can think of no one better to discuss today's theme with the audience. And the theme is writing from the margins. And basically the idea of today's session is to explore in different ways the notion, the very popular notion in the world, I think that started with Oprah Winfrey, that self-expression automatically equates to a sort of personal catharsis. And while I believe, and we believe, my experience is that this is true in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily always the case. And in a country like South Africa, where so many people are on the margins, where the majority of people are on the margins, and so many people turn to poetry and literature to try and express their sense of marginalization, I personally have seen a lot of people sort of emerge from that process in an uncomfortable space. And so we thought we'd use today's session to explore 2 dimensions: the publishing dimension, the industry that we all are in or hope to be in, and then the personal dimension, how we write from a sense of marginalization, how we try and express ourselves, and the things we can think about when we do that. Because this is a Wits Writing Program workshop, we also want to bring in some practical elements. So we're fortunate to have 3 Wits Writing Program fellows with us today. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves one by one, and then also to give us maybe a little story of their own about submitting work, the dreaded submission process, and how that particular experience shaped how they understand their own writing and their own sort of life in this strange creative economy of ours. So if we could start with that, guys, maybe Lucy Coffey, could we start with you?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucy Coffey. I'm a part of the Wits Writing Centre Fellows. I'm currently a PhD candidate. So my story, it was during my honors level where I was submitting my first written, like proper stuff, I would say, from undergrad. That felt like I felt lost, and the feedback I got, it was painful a bit. It was like, I was not prepared how to receive feedback and all of that. And as a writer, I did not have my voice. So I felt so marginalized. I didn't have a voice. I didn't have my stance and my stand. But yeah, I'm grateful for that because that was actually my breakthrough. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Lucy. And could we move to Laurie Jo?
Hello, everyone. My name is Laurie Jo Bateman. I am currently a master's student in the English department. And my story is not quite academic, but I last year started writing a novel, something that I've wanted to do for years. Never quite had the courage to begin, so I took that leap of faith. It's a fantasy novel and an LGBTQ novel. And when I haven't submitted it yet, but I presented it, sections of it to the Writing Centre, I was terrified because it's not something I'm used to doing. It's not academic. I've only ever written academic work. But I do think that I was so worried that since I'm writing from an LGBTQ novel, I was really worried about being marginalized, not being accepted into the world of literature. And I have to admit, the feedback I got was very helpful, although at times it was a bit nerve-wracking because it's your baby, you know. So it was, I think, even though we write from marginalized spaces, this is still a space for us. And I felt like that, when I got that feedback, that really reaffirmed that for me.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larija. And lastly, Babalwa.
Good morning, everyone. So I am Babalwa Bekebu, and I just submitted my master's. So right now I am unemployed. So anyway, I guess my first, it was a horrible one. When I started applying for work, I was just off my undergrad degree, which was a BSc biochemistry, and I was probably writing one of my first sets of cover letters. And I won't lie to you, I didn't have a clue where to begin, where to start. I just had a brief introduction to what a cover letter is. And I'd say right now it would be embarrassing if I'd show you, because I think I didn't quite grasp what was supposed to be said in a cover letter. And the only way that I found out was through going through writing sessions where I went through recruiters and they helped me with my writing, especially towards cover letters. So that has been a great growth, I guess, a great growth exposure experience, I guess, because now I'd say that I am, I guess, decent in writing cover letters. So that was necessary in my development as, I guess, an academic and a job seeker. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much. Before we get chatting with Phehello, I would like to share a little chunk of text that we will circle back to when we get to the more practical elements of this session. And I would like obviously our three writing fellows to have a look at it, and while we're waffling away, maybe see if they can improve it. And the text I'm going to show you is, in my experience, a very common construct that people use when they're writing memoirs, and particularly in the realm of disability. The following construct, I've used it all my life, and I've seen it a lot in all the work I've done on other people's manuscripts. So let me share the screen quickly. And there it is. So the question for the participants is, how could this little chunk of text be improved? And we'll discuss what improvement even means later on in the session. But here's the text. I have lived a life full of physical pain. Every day I have to deal with things very few people would be able to understand. This is my story. Okay, I'm going to read it one more time just so everyone's got time to kind of write it down. I have lived a life full of physical pain. Every day I have to deal with things very few people would be able to understand. This is my story.
You don't want to copy it and put it in the chat, maybe?
I don't think I have the skill. Okay, we'll come back to it. Right now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time chatting to Phehello. Phehello, as long as I've known you, which is now a long time, you've had a passion, and a very specific passion, for exposing the voices, initially in the spoken word scene, but later across literature. The voices that are not heard, but that are very much a part of our lives. Why is that? What is it in you that wanted to do that?
Thanks, Andrew. It's lovely to be here. So thank you guys for accepting us and inviting us, I guess, and bringing us into this wonderful space. I think part of it, Andrew, is, for me, it has always been about, I think that to some extent, not all stories should become books, but we should all express ourselves. So I think that is important. And I suppose our experience, our combined experience, has always been that wherever we wanted to publish, whenever we tried to publish, we would always be rejected. And often there would be no reason. It's like, not even a footag bag, like there's just absolute silence. And that had you and I worried that we think some of these voices, some of them really do need a bit of polishing, like all of us. I mean, everyone needs to be polished a bit, but some of them are really genuinely good voices that should be out there. So for me, there's always been about not being, snobbish about, who gets to get published and who doesn't. It's very important that, we judge the merit of everyone, every writing on its quality of writing, not on where they come from, who they are, and so on and so on. So, even with BKO, you submit, we read, then we say, yes, no, fix, let's look at this, let's talk about that, let's improve here, there, and there. It's always been that. It's always been the idea of everyone, just about everyone that can put pen to paper, at the very least, they deserve to be read. And whether you publish or not, that's another thing. But, that opportunity to submit, to someone read, someone to give you feedback, and all of that is quite important. But also, I think a lot of what we would today call big writers also started that way.
Well, I mean, if I look back at just all the people, all the names that you've published through all those years, in effect, a lot of the time, what you've done is the bridge, for their career. Yeah,
absolutely. And Tewo says the same thing. You remember our friend Tewo always says the same thing, that if it wasn't for BKO, so and so would not be the big writer that they are today, because we managed to expose them, we managed to give them that platform, and then in no time the right people are reading your work, and you have the confidence to submit, and in no time really you are able to pop, so to speak. So we always have to start somewhere, I guess.
How onerous has it been for you to be the bridge? Because as far as I understand it, it's quite an endeavor to operate at the smaller level.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. It's a financial disaster.
It's terrible. It's not even a business. It's a passion thing. But at the same time, outside of its financial onerous nature or financial burden, I publish primarily because it's a philosophical thing. It's a political thing. It's a conscious thing. It's the right thing to do. It's not so much for the financial gain, even though I would like to be a millionaire from my books. But really, for me, publishing at the level that I do, on the margins, on the fringes, is a deeply political thing. It's a deeply philosophical thing. It's about language. It's about languages. It's about identity. It's about exposing more and more people, whether they are from, as Lorijo said, from LGBTQI, from, the Bundus of Free State, from, anywhere and everywhere. So it's also really a deeply philosophical thing, in the sense that I think that we have to own the intellectual property, intellectual production and cultural production of the continent. One of the saddest stories that I always tell people is that of Indaba My Children of Credo Mutla, that no one in the country can republish that book, despite its grand size and grand importance to general culture in the continent. But you can't do anything because it's not owned here. It's not owned.
Who owned it? Someone else.
Of the big five. Yes.
Someone else.
It's somewhere else. So that for me is that cultural production has to stay here in some way, form, or shape.
Yeah.
And so from that philosophical point of view, it's also about pushing this idea of, are we both African? you know, and
which in South Africa is always a questionable
which is
kind of
always,
thing.
you know, and it becomes a color thing instead of, you know, origin and where you come from and all of that. So that's philosophically, somebody has to do the kind of marginal publishing that we do to make sure that people are able to then go to the next step and become, you know, the Oprah Winfrey list kind of writers. Yeah.
How has this experience influenced your own writing? I was really interested in reading Note to Taiwa and thinking about it, knowing you, and thinking it's such a weird thing, that book, because on the one hand, I know that no publisher would ever go, no mainstream publisher would go, we're going to publish a long reflective essay on Moses Molelekwa. They would run a mile because they wouldn't think it would sell. But then on the other hand, a text like that, and the things you say and the way you say them, are clearly relevant to all the creative people I have known in Joburg. Moses was such an important figure within our broad creative community. So I'm intrigued by what is this personal spark that led you to write the Sankamoto book and then the Moses book. Why jazz? Why South African music? How did you end up writing there?
At a very shallow level, I'm just generally interested in music, in the history of music. But I think at a slightly deeper level, I always try and look for let's call it the traces of the cultural foundations of popular culture as we have it today. So for example, if you look at the connection of Sesotho, Ditsomo, or around the fire folklores, and the idea that Sankamoto, the name itself, comes from a very old Sesotho folklore of Sankatana, and how they use Sesotho as a thread throughout their music, but they also play this new age kind of jazz, fuse it with Sesotho difela or hymnals, and then fuse it with this choral music of J.P. Mohapelo and all of that. It's extremely interesting. That part of cultural mix and mixologies is interesting to me.
I have to say, it brings, what you're saying there, it brings to mind one of the big ironies of South Africa, of all our millions of ironies, in that, you know, where we've just said this is a marginal text, it's from the margins, and yet it represents a culture that's actually the majority culture in the country. And so in a lot of ways, the majority of South Africans are living marginalized existences and are marginalized in our publishing world. It's extremely odd, that kind of paradigm.
But it's to be expected. If you really think about who owns the big publishing industries, the big publishing businesses, the printing and all of that, it shouldn't surprise us. Those are people who are really not interested in the big cultural discussions of the continent, of the country and all of that. They are really interested in the sleaze, the cheese, the stuff that will sell and make them millions and all of that. Whereas from the margins, and this is a point that I was thinking about on my way here, that writing and publishing from the margins can be so liberating in the sense that then you can do all these funky things that you know the big publishers would not even dream of. And it's freeing as well. And you know, to people like Laurie Jo, who said the LGBTQI novel, writing from that point of view, in fact, if she ever gets to a point where she writes for a big publisher versus the point where she's writing for herself now, she will realize the disparity, because the big publishers, the big publishing industry will actually prescribe to you how a novel should read.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
I mean, that's been my experience trying to write fiction from a disability perspective, and getting it sent back and going, this is not a novel.
Absolutely.
And my reaction is, well, it's my novel. And then I was like, well, tough.
So I think also writing from the margins, it's terrible for many reasons, but really for that cathartic, if that's what you are looking for, that process of catharsis and all of that, writing from the margins is the perfect place to do that. But if you are looking for this major global or national success and sell thousands and thousands of books, then you will soon realize that, the margins are not for you, because the big publishing industry is very prescriptive on how it should read, what it should look like, and all of that. And the editing sometimes can just gut your writing. And
I want to come back to that shortly, but I also want to just ask you quickly. I mean, the way we've been talking, it's all marginalized, it's all little, but you've had quite a lot of success also publishing in indigenous languages. I'm thinking of Sabatha's book, which won an award in 2013. Tell us a bit about that experience. How risky did you think it was to publish an indigenous language novel in 2013 for you?
It was. It still is. Let's be honest. Firstly, anything that is written in any African language is relegated to a textbook. It has to go to high schools and all of that. That in itself curbs what you can say and what you can't say. So you can't write about sex. If you write about sex, you have to write using certain words. You have to, be metaphorical and all manner of things. So firstly, that in itself marginalizes where African language literature is being read. Right, so it's seen as only relevant for schools, right, and primarily because of the numbers. So if the book gets prescribed, that you get 5,000-10,000 copies ordered at a time and all of that. So there is an economic reason to that. But what we or the big industry misses is the fact that this is also production of culture in itself. If you think back to the late 1800s into the early 1900s, when Thomas Mofolo wrote his first novel. It was a serialized articles on one of the newspapers in Lesotho, but I think by 1910, it became the first Sesotho novel. By 1925, when he writes Chaka, Chaka becomes this massive thing, right? But what makes it massive is not only that it's written in Sesotho, it's when it starts to be translated, right? So I think even today, still writing in African languages is a way of not marginalization by your own self-expression or by your intention, but it's also a way of gatekeeping. Someone wants to know what we are writing about. What are these natives writing about? So we have to know what they are writing about. So it's not even, you are not considered that commercial yet. And I think we have to, it's something that we have to focus on, developing those audiences that can read and that should read in African languages. Other than that, I don't see us competing with English and Afrikaans texts. So it's a I find to be a very interesting idea or means of marginalizing writers by actually considering your language commercially not so viable. It's a way of marginalization.
And there's also clearly an issue, there's a call globally in literature all the time, the call for diversity, more diverse voices, this kind of thing. But there's the obvious irony that a lot of the people who are making the call and receiving the manuscripts are mono-tongued, or have no experience of the diversity that they're seeking.
Absolutely.
And so there's this kind of blockage in the publishing system. And that leads me to kind of the idea that I think is worth discussing. Let's say you're going to write from the margins, which I think a lot of South Africans do and want to do. As far as I see it, there are three kind of paradigms. You're going to either submit to the big guys and hope to become world famous, or you're going to submit to an indie publisher and hope to represent your narrative, or you're going to end up self-publishing and hope to make some kind of other business model that works for you. What should people who are making these decisions, how do you make these decisions? How do you line up what you should be looking for when you're trying to expose your story? Because my experience is that the people who have the better experiences are the ones who are more clear-headed about what the options are when it comes to publishing. What do people need to think about while they're writing before they get to submitting or deciding whether to self-publish or anything else?
I will say two things. The first one is that don't self-publish just because we're rejected.
Yeah.
Self-publish for other reasons. A lot of us would go the self-publishing route because, you know, I write in terrible English and I don't want to be edited. Things like that, right? So I think going the self-publishing route should be a very well thought out philosophical, political, and process that one, I don't think any big publisher is going to take this text. For example, the Moses Molelekwa book, when I shopped it around and people were like, but it's not a biography, it's not a memoir.
Yeah.
So everyone, the big guys are looking for the sleaze, the controversy, you know, why he killed himself, what happened to his wife and all of that. They're not interested in the nuanced analysis of his cultural influence and music and all of that. So I knew off the bat, even when I was shopping the script around, that I'm going to end up having to hire someone in Geko to actually publish this. But my reasons were not that I've been rejected, therefore, you know, throw my toys out of the pot and I'm just going to do it myself, you know.
And I think the other thing about self-publishing that it's crucially important, you can move more copies of a book you've self-published than a publisher would.
Absolutely.
And by significant numbers.
Yeah.
But then you have to have appetite for self-promotion and marketing on a kind of industrial level, because, you know, you're going to have to shop your book around for a period of 6 months via a long series of events.
Yeah.
And some people have the appetite for that and others don't. Yeah. You know?
And I think that the perfect example for that is Dudu Busani Dube's Shomu the Wife.
Yeah.
Which is now a huge thing on Showmax. She's, I think, writing the 6th book and she's still doing it herself.
Yeah.
And she is massively successful on that score. And I think we now have a template of how to do that. So you can, for example, develop your audience on social media and elsewhere, in events, in all manner of places. But I think as much as a lot of us, you know, look down on self-publishing, I think it's a perfect option for people who are writing and publishing from the margins. It's not something that we should take for granted. I think the big publishing industry is waking up to the fact that there is something on this or in this self-publishing thing. So
yeah, which is why the hybrid model exists. And that's the other thing people need to be aware of is, you know, self-publishing, I'm going to write it, I'm going to lay it out in InDesign, I'm going to do the cover art, I'm going to do the marketing and promotion, is generally not possible for most people.
Yes.
A lot of people don't seem to be aware that there's the hybrid model where you can engage with a service provider who does a lot of the production work with you, but you front up a lot of the cost, if not all of the cost.
Yeah.
And that gives you a lot of power that you wouldn't otherwise have when it comes to self-publishing.
Or traditional publishing. And I think the hybrid model also works for indie publishers as well, because it means in some cases I can say we'll go 50-50 on this book. I like it, but you put up X, I will put up Y, and then we do this big sort of joint effort of publisher and author kind of setup going forward. And I think that's crucial, that's very important. But other than that, I think people should not shy away from that. People must self-publish in the scale or in the business of, or in the context of a publishing industry that seems to publish people based on everything else but the merit of their literature.
Yeah,
you know,
which we're already nearly out of time.
Sure.
But it brings me back to, I think, the final thing that I've observed in myself and in others in this particular sphere is the risk of self-publishing or going on your own is your editorial ecosystem.
Yes.
Because we all need editors and we need significant editing. And my view is, if you're going to go on the self-publishing journey, it's not just a question of creating a text and producing it and distributing it. It's also that crucial period where you've created the text and then you need to be torn apart brutally with red all over your text and reconfigure it. And that's not an easy thing. How does one set up your own editorial ecosystem?
Firstly, please don't go to your mom.
Yeah, come on, my mom's a great editor.
No, your mom is an amazing.
She always tells me I'm a genius.
Yes, no, but your mom is an amazing editor. But in general, so what I do with my text, and I don't want to prescribe to people what they should do, but when I send my work out, I specifically ask people for what they don't like about the text.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Yeah.
So I know I'm a very good writer. I can be prosaic and all of that. That part I know. So I don't want to be patted on the back.
Yeah.
What I'm looking for is, where does this text lack? What are my weaknesses? What can I fix? So if in your mind you already have that sort of frame, it's very easy to take the rejection.
And I got to pick up on that, because I found it incredibly difficult in my life to find people. And my whole life is, and everyone's a writer, everyone's going to be but it's been a really interesting experience. People, when you give them a text, feel powerfully, if they connected to you socially or in family terms, they feel powerfully motivated to pat you on the head. And they really struggle unless they get an explicit instruction to identify what they don't like.
Absolutely.
So unless you control that process as the writer, what you're going to get is many pats on the head.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's
very dangerous.
And dangerous as well.
Yeah.
So what I do personally, and people can take this as advice or not, is I send text out and I say, please tell me what you do not like.
Yeah.
Whether it's the order, whether it's the plot, whether it's my usage of words, whether it's my grammar, absolutely anything. What do you not like? And the amount of feedback that I've gotten has been incredible. I mean, on the Moses Molelekwa thing, for example, someone said, you have written this in the way you speak. And I said, but that was my intention. I don't want it to feel like an academic text. I want it to feel like you and I are having a chat. That's why I call it a note tool. If I was sitting across this guy, what would I say? And generally, I repeat myself. Generally, I argue simple things along long way around, and then I circle back to them and all of that. And that's how I speak. So, but that helped me to reread and then maybe cut out on some of that and pull back on that and write slightly better. So I think it's important to specifically ask for that kind of feedback. What do you know?
Rather than pom-poms, which are not going to get you.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I think we're out of time for the waffle. I would like to now go back to our three writing fellows from the Writing Centre, and that little exercise, which I threw up on the screen earlier. I'm going to put it up on the screen again, and then if I can ask you guys, Laurie Jo, maybe we'll start with you, to give us some thoughts of yours on that little chunk of text.
And sorry, we are not picking on you, Laurie Jo.
Hi. So first I'm just going to give some feedback that I thought, and then I wrote my version. So that's obviously, it's from my point of view, not necessary. I'm not telling the writer what to write. I just want to make that very clear.
Of course.
My feedback, firstly, is a language thing, to avoid using perfect tense. Firstly, it's unnecessarily grammatically difficult, and it also creates distance between the author or the character and the reader. I also think that it's vital for the first few lines of any text to really capture the reader's attention. And I sort of felt like these lines were very common opening lines for a memoir. So I thought there could be other tools used to draw the reader in.
Yeah.
And I also specifically think being more descriptive really helps to draw your reader in. So I'm just going to look at my screen on this side. My vision was, what is the worst pain you ever felt? Perhaps a broken bone as a child, a cut, a burn. Do you remember how it felt? how you are physically incapable of fully focusing on anything else. Physical pain can take over your mind and your life. It took over mine. This is my story.
Lovely, thank you. And that actually tallies amazingly with the little edit I did, which I'll show later. But yeah, thank you very much. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Lucy, can we shift to you?
Okay, am I audible? Perfect.
Yes.
So I was a bit concerned as well. It doesn't have that catchy thing. So when you say I've lived a life full of physical pain, what do you mean physical pain? You know, sometimes to catch the reader's attention, what are you referring to? Don't be just general, especially if you want to bring people into what you are talking about. This is your story. You are owning it, and you are writing it as a point of it's liberating for you. You're saying, I've been here, but now I'm here. I can talk about it. So it should have a sense of I'm owning it, and I want it to come across as a healing something for other people. This might be healing. So being specific, and yeah, so I think just being more descriptive than just giving general lines.
Great.
I actually did not write my...
No problem. No problem.
Version.
Super, thank you very much. And lastly, Babalwa.
All right, so I also felt the same way as Laurie Jane, sorry. So as Laurie Jo. So I thought that it was wordy. I thought that some of the arrangements in the word use could have been better. Mine is not as good as hers, because hers, like, she showed the true essence of capturing the reader in the example that she made. So my example goes a little something like this. My life has been drawn with pain. My daily struggles would overwhelm any other person. This is my story. So I sort of made it less wordy, but I also like drew out the essence of the message that the writer was trying to portray. So yeah, that was my take on it.
Super, super. Thank you so much. Excellent. So I'm just going to scroll down and show you my edit, and then the reason why I wanted to raise this as a particular issue. I think Kurt Vonnegut made the point in one of his many things about writing that with fiction, and I think it applies to memoirs and nonfiction as well, you need to be careful of immediately thrusting your protagonist into a situation that they need to resolve before you've allowed the reader to form a bond with them, you know. And I think someone else, DBC Pierre, said in his book about writing, also, humans have a strangely weird inability to cope in text with the things that they cope with every day in the real world, and that you need to help your reader along. So I think in that first example, the reason I wanted to raise it is because I've seen myself do it, and every time I've tried to write about my physical circumstance, I want to convey, when I'm doing that, the rawness, the brutality of this physical experience. And so I charge straight for the jugular, and it's the eye jugular. Let me show you what this thing is like, you know. And then I think in doing that, the problem is, the risk is that you sort of almost alienate the reader because they haven't had the opportunity to build a bond with you. And so what's great about Laurie Jo's rewrite, and you'll see here on the screen, my rewrite is very similar, although not well written. It opens with a direct reference to the reader and seeks to create a relationship between the reader and the writer. And for me, the tip I have for anyone who's writing from a sense of marginalization is that we before I can be a fantastic sort of maxim to follow when you're developing your manuscript, because if you just bear that in mind, it has the ability to create a stronger emotional connection with the reader. And that not only creates, I believe, a better text, but it's also, if you wanted to shoot for the great penguin horizon, it's also the kind of thing that the bigger publishers would be looking for when they're looking to publish stories from the margins.
So I think to add to this, I think that the rewrites are amazing. And it's part of what I've experienced as a publisher. You get two kinds of submissions. The first submission is an incredible story written terribly, or very good writing, but no story, right? So so I think it's a very dicey balance that you as a writer, primarily you have to do. You need to ask yourself, am I just floral in my language, but I don't have a story? Or am I raw in telling my story? I have not done all these things that you're talking about, introducing your characters properly and all of that. And personally, as a publisher, I'm a sucker for prose. Like, I'm a sucker for good writing. Even if your story is bad, but if you write it well, I will give you a second read. I'll give you a second chance, you know. So and
I think there's a great maxim also, self-expression is never just about you.
No,
I think that's the trap I've always fallen into
Yeah.
myself when trying to express myself in this area, is because it's so personal and meaningful to me.
Yeah.
I've prioritized my experience at the expense of my relationship with the reader.
Absolutely. Or at the expense of the story itself.
Yeah.
Because sometimes
absolutely.
it's also not about you, it's not about the reader, it's about the story itself.
Yeah.
Which is what I tried to do with the Moses Molelekwa book, to say, in as much as I'm in love with this chap and his music and what he makes me feel like, what is the story I'm trying to tell?
Yeah.
The story is not so much about my experience of his music, but it's also about his music in general on its own. And that for me is the story. And I found myself cutting back on the I.
It's a lifelong challenge.
It's a lifelong challenge, you know, and you start to make it more relevant to the broader audience. This person did this for South African music, for South African culture. So it becomes our story more than just mine, you know. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're nearing question time, but I want to finish by coming all the way back to our participants and their stories of submissions, and discuss with you from both perspectives the hell of submitting. Because, you know, I've been on both sides of the fence. I hate submitting. And so, you know, when you sent your list through of things that people need to do when they're submitting, you basically listed from your perspective, from a publisher perspective, pay attention to the guidelines, don't format your work excessively, etc., etc. And
that,
it drives me insane as a submitter.
Yeah.
But I gather from what you're saying is people like me are still not paying enough attention.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the only reason why I reject work.
Yeah.
It's the only reason. The poem could be amazing. The short story could be amazing. Just the fact that you have not paid attention to any of that. I'm like,
how common is that for you as the person on the receiving end?
It is amazing. It is amazingly common. It's one of those things that I come across every time. For example, when we were doing the Geko prize for Sesotho writing, we're looking for long form in Sesotho, and people were writing like 3,000 words.
Yeah.
But I mean, we specifically said 20,000 words. You know, minimum is 20,000. But we got close to 100 submissions. Only 10 could make it on the basis of the submission guidelines.
Yeah.
The rest were just
out.
They were just out on the basis of you did not even hit 10,000 words. And it's amazing that still happens, because it's the first thing that you put out as a publisher, is to say, I'm looking for this and this and this and that. The funny thing, another funny thing that happened was that people were submitting in Zulu. And I'm like, this is a Sesotho prize. It's a Sesotho prize, right? And exactly the same thing happens in BKO. People send PDFs. Like, would you please send a Word document? So, because all it does is that it creates a second layer of production. So I need to find a way of extracting your words from the PDF, and then you lay it out and all of that.
And so you would just, you don't even look at it.
You don't even look at it. And it's the most unfortunate part, because half of those submissions, some of them are incredible. They are amazing. And you are going to disqualify just on the basis of that.
Okay.
But I've had the luck and the opportunity of, writing to and fro with people and say, I love this. I really want to work with this. Can you do this? And, in very odd cases, I would say, this is so incredible. We cannot do not do it.
I'm going to work with your sloppiness.
I'm going to work with your sloppiness, but just this one time, you know, and then you will to and fro and all of that. But, you know, in the main, the big publishers would never do that. They don't care how good you are. They don't care who you are. They just won't do that. And
I think the difficulty from the writer's perspective is, you know, you're going to get rejected. And so you're targeting 400 publishers all over the world, you know, and then each one of those has a slightly different set of stipulations. Send the first 10,000 words, send the first 1,000 words, send an attachment as PDF, only in the body of an email, etc., etc. And so it kind of, you almost grow a little bit petulant about it. And so you start to skip over it because you're like,
but you can't. You just can't. You know, it's some, like, you know, some people are so particular about it. Some publishers are so absolutely pedantic about it that would like to see the first chapter. And that's all we want.
So then bite down on that and give them the first chapter.
You know, and so it's crucial to read the submission guidelines. What do these people want?
And they're never the same.
They're never the same. They're generally similar, but they are not to the T the same. So it's extremely important to read that and follow that.
We've got a few questions coming in and we're late, but I want one more topic before we get to the questions. Babawa mentioned the cover letter. So there's the content of your submission, but then there's the mystical thing of the cover letter. And if you Google it, you get this bewildering kind of range of the art of the cover letter stuff. And I've got to say that in all my life, and I've been submitting for 25 years, I still am baffled by what I should be doing with my cover letter. Help me.
Okay, so I'll speak as a submitter myself, as somebody that's tried to submit. As soon as I'm asked for a cover letter, I don't submit.
All right.
Great. What am I supposed to say?
Right.
Are you judging my personality? Are you judging me for who I am, or are you judging my text?
And this is a particular thing when you're writing from the margins, because so if you're writing a book about disability, are you required then in your cover letter to waive how disabled are you? Like, what's your score on the disability index? I mean, I find that really problematic when writing these things.
So I honestly, I find absolutely no reason for it. And even when people submit to BKO, to Geko, and then they write a cover letter, I'm like, why? I'm not interested in where you work, what you've done, how many things you've published before and all of that. I am really going to read your text and make my decision completely, entirely, and only based on your text.
So do you think it's valid? Because my approach, and I don't know whether this is valid because everyone places such emphasis in certain areas on the cover letter, but my approach is still 2 paragraphs. This is who I am. I live here. I've written this. Please have a look. It's about this. And for me, that's all I can bring myself to do. I can't do the performative cover letter. Do you think, I mean, that's viable? Is that materially going to impact your chances of being loved by a publisher?
I think so. So, for example, you know, we know with our big white monopoly publishers, for example, they like these people from the margins. So I come from the Bundus of Transkei.
Okay, deep rural.
Deep rural. My mother has been a domestic worker all her life. My father is a sheep herder and all of that. So that could be, you know, somewhat important to them in the sense that, oh, we are publishing this person from absolutely out of, you know, the deep, dark South Africa. In some cases, it could also be if, for example, we are submitting to a very intellectual or academic publication, they really want to know whether you have a master's degree, you have this, you have this, you have that. So it's important to highlight those. Except that, for example, one very, very popular academic online journal rejected me despite what I would consider my very big portfolio, purely on the basis that I don't have a master's degree. Purely on that basis. I mean, they did not even want to read anything I've written. Whether it's important, politically, philosophically, whatever, they were just not interested.
And so it's in your interest actually to make sure that you get all the vital information in there, because a lot of the times decisions are being made purely on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, we've got 8 minutes for questions. I see one which I was interested in. thing from Babawa. Is emotional connection with the reader applicable in academic writing as well?
I would say yes and no. So I consider what I write pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-academic. It's not entirely, pop kind of writing. I always try and do the proper referencing. Base everything I write on theories, on what people have said, and all of that. So if you are going to do something like that, remember that you are still going to be read by a person. You're not being read by a computer. So you are read by a person. So whether that connection is emotional, it's by way of subject matter, it's by way of historical importance or whatever, it is there. So it may differ from, how emotional is emotional. But
and also, like science writing is going to be very different to sociology, etc., and the range of emotional connections is going to naturally be different.
But for example, a science publication could start as simple as X amount of kids have died because of this. That in itself, it's the basis of your scientific research. You have created an emotional connection because all of us don't want our children to die. So it might not be emotional, but it is a connection nonetheless.
And I think also what we're saying when we were working with that little exercise, we before I, is also like in the academic world. I think the emotional connection can matter and can be a really powerful kind of force in an academic text. But you really want to watch the foregrounding of I. In the academic world, if you're going to reach for that emotional connection, you want to reach through the prism of your work rather than the personal experience prism.
I completely agree with that.
Okay, another question from Pamela Nichols on YouTube. What about author websites as an additional publishing channel? I'm thinking of Kai Miller, Warsa and Shire, whose websites can point to their published work, but also curate blogs, extracts, etc.
I think as the continent in general, one of the things that we have completely ignored is tech in publishing. We are underutilizing tech, whether as indie publishers, whether as big publishers. We're only going for the big technology. So everyone, when I publish someone, they always ask me, is there going to be an ebook? Is there going to be a Kindle version and all of that? As if those are the only forms of digital publishing that we should do. So I think in general, we have underutilized digital and tech in the continent. I only know of one website in Nigeria, Okada Books, which is a bit of Amazon for Africa. But I think it's not just websites. I would extend Pam's question into digital in general. Are we doing enough digitally? What about TikTok? What about curating some of your stuff on TikTok?
But
I don't know what TikTok does, but I'm just saying.
People love it.
People love it. This Instagram book stuff and all of that.
It's a weird one for me. I've toyed with this stuff through the years. What I've found is that, and maybe it's just my personality, and I think it's important to line up your own personality against the world and try and understand it. Because what I found for me is you set up the digital channel, you write in the digital channel. Let's say you set up a blog, something like that. But I'm not a self-promoter, so my audience is my mom and my cat and my wife, and then over time, I kind of feel my energy for the thing degrading because I've kind of missed in developing this model the marketing aspect. If you're going to do, in my view, digital websites, all that kind of thing, then you also need to figure out how you're going to put that stuff to work because nothing lives in the dark.
But it's that point that you were making that, in self-publishing, you can't be the jack of all these trades,
Partnerships.
Partnerships and paid stuff, paid Facebook advertising and all of that. So as soon as there is that web channel, you just have to make sure that it's updated, the content is fresh, but somebody else has to take it to the world.
Yeah.
Somebody that specializes in that, you know, and somebody that either you pay or you are in partnership of sorts with and all of that. But I think we cannot ignore that digital aspect. And from the margins, I understand why we do, because not always do we have either the time or the money for the publishing, the writing, you know, the time, you know, away to go edit, and now the website, and now
because you can't Hong Kong a website either. You need to edit it. It needs to be decent, right?
Yes. Yeah. So from our point of view, from the marginal point of view, I understand why it would become tedious, but also I think it's one of the perfect ways in which you can really become big. Because if done well, digital can do amazing things.
Yeah, and one more thought, because there's one more question before we run out, but also when it comes to Kindle, I think South Africans often misread the Kindle market entirely. You produce a book and let's say your retail price is 300 Rand, and then you work out what that is in dollars and you sell your ebook for that amount. Whereas if you look at how a lot of writers use Kindle and Amazon, is they come in at 50 cents or $1 for the book. And that opens you up to a whole different kind of market, and you can achieve volume. And once you've got and some traction in that market, and then once you've got that, you can look at raising the cost of your book. And I don't see local South African authors or publishers, for that matter, taking that model. And I feel that that's kind of an opportunity missed.
Yes and no. So there are a number of South Africans who are doing
37.
There are a number of South Africans who are doing the Kindle thing or the Amazon thing quite well. Couple of ladies I know don't work. They just write these teen fiction things. But the downshot of that is that often as soon as your book is on Amazon, no publisher wants to publish it.
Yeah.
Like absolutely no.
It's a pure play.
But also, I mean, you are in a marketplace of 100 million writers. How do you make sure that you stand out, right?
Yeah.
So it's also a very tricky thing. But yeah, I think we need better digital outlets for what we are doing. And I think as the continent in general, we've not done enough of that.
Last question from Lucy was, how do you encourage someone who's writing but discouraged to complete the manuscript? We've got 30 seconds. So my feeling is always, you won't know what it is until you've created a lump of clay. And your first draft of a manuscript is essentially a lump of clay. And the objective is not to create something that's perfect, it's to give yourself something to work with.
Yeah.
And so you shouldn't judge yourself at all on that lump of clay. I mean, I've left 40,000 words on the cutting room floor from a novel, no problem. But those words were important. They were rubbish, but they were important to get me to the point where I had the lump of clay and then I could shape it.
Yeah.
So my answer to you, Lucy, is create the lump of clay and don't judge it until you have got your lump of clay and then you've edited it into shape, and then you can start judging whether it's a good book or a bad book. Your motivation in that first draft, or my motivation, is always lump of clay first, everything else later. And a lump of clay for a novel, it's 100-something thousand words. That's a big lump of clay, you know? Yeah. And
don't call it a manuscript.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Like,
it's a thing.
I'm writing, I'll see where it takes me, you know, and then you start cutting down or you start adding up, and then it becomes something else, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I think that's our session. I think we've snuck in on time. And thank you especially to our participants from the Wits Writing Program, Lucy, Laurie, Joe, and Babal. Yeah, we really appreciate your input. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.